Hi everyone. I've got Sarah Henderson with me today, and Sarah is a writer and she has publications in plain sight. She has her own Substack. She's also a member of Mana Wahine Korero, and she's also been studying language and linguistics for at least a decade. And today we're going to use her knowledge to talk about the New Zealand Midwifery Council's revised scope of practice and the revised scope of practice, and why the scope of practice is so important to midwives, and why the language they've used in it now is a linguistic abomination. So, Sarah, give us a bit of a rundown about a little bit about your background and why you kind of have what you can see in the scope that is just so terrible.
Well, thank you very much, Katrina, for the opportunity to talk about the Midwifery Council and about language, because that's my favourite subject. So, in terms of my background, I'll just focus on the languages and linguistics, because that's the relevant part of this. Oh, and also I was a newborn hearing screener for a number of years as part of the pilot program that rolled out so that you can tell. The idea is to identify a hearing loss in a newborn baby within the first 24 hours, because it's so important to language acquisition that babies can hear right from the get-go. And they've already, if they do have a hearing loss, and they've already missed some of that sound and sound acquisition in utero. So it's really important, because the younger you are, the better, the more powerful your language acquisition capacity is. And it slowly begins to die as we hit puberty. And then once puberty is over, then you can, as an adult, continue on and learn a new language if you have a foundational grammar underneath. But if you don't actually acquire any language before your teens, then you can no longer do that.
So just to sort of just explore that a little bit, not to get down into it too deeply, is
Yeah.
that you're saying that by puberty we start to sort of gradually lose the abilities to acquire language. So when we get things like the scope of practice that have completely changed the language on us, it's
Yes.
actually quite difficult for
Yeah.
adults. Right.
Yes, it's so language acquisition is something, and when we talk about language acquisition, it's actually about grammar acquisition in childhood, because vocabulary is window dressing, if you like. You know, some people have a large vocabulary and some people have a smaller vocabulary, but that's not as relevant as whether or not they've got a good grip on the grammar, because the grammar of our own tongue is the structure that everything hangs on. It's like the scaffold or the frame of a building, and then you put everything else around it.
That's
But
it's like how we understand what everyone's saying, basically.
that's
Is
exactly right.
is
Yeah,
what,
it's,
yeah.
it's the map for and the category and meaning network that sits underneath the vocabulary, and then the vocabulary fits in on top of that.
Right.
But the time for grammar acquisition is finite. So that's where these stories of you can look them up as feral children who've been abandoned and have had no exposure to language or grammar.
Mm.
Once they have been rescued from wherever they are, they do learn to communicate in a sense, but they'll never be able to formulate a sentence, a proper one. They
Okay.
can never do, hi, my name is blah blah, and your name is, because they just don't know where the words are supposed to go. And that's what we learn. And that's what dies after puberty. You can't do it after that. It's not possible. So,
Right.
um, that's this period of time that we acquire language, and this is why it's
Mm.
so important for the children in school that they don't get their pronouns and their grammar all muddled up, because once it's over, then they won't be able to get it back. It'll be really confusing for them. Why will these,
Right.
so
Oh,
and
I see. Yeah. So it's like when they get sort of learn this confusing language, and when they're little, and as they get older, they're not able to remedy it.
No, they won't be able to put back, once they've passed puberty, they won't actually be able to, in the sense that the rest of the grammar is going to be roughly okay, we hope. It'll be easier for them than it will for, say, a feral child. They could never do it.
Yeah.
But the meanings of pronouns, because we're not actually teaching children the proper grammar, and the pronouns are so confusing and they don't have a real meaning to them, they can apply to anyone or anything and it can change from day to day. That part of the grammar, which is personal pronouns, he, she, it, we, you, us, these matter, in terms of where they fit in language and who they're talking about and how many people they refer to and what sex they are. And, they help us to identify who the people are in our lives and what they do and how safe they are. And, they're a really important part of language.
So they're kind of they're like shortcuts in a way, aren't they? Because we I mean, this is one of the things I understand about language,
Yes.
is that we use shortcuts all the time, so that we don't have to constantly explain everything from the beginning every time we want to communicate with somebody.
Yes, and each language has a different way of doing that, and one of the things that people struggle with most often when they learn a new language, especially English speakers, because our word order is quite unusual in the global language family. We have a subject, verb, object language. So I am going to the shop. But in most other languages, it's actually not that way. Most other languages are VSO languages. So the verb going, I am, to the shop.
Okay.
Which is quite unusual. And for as English speakers, we struggle to do that into other languages, and other people find English very difficult to learn because of the way that we think. And not all languages apply pronouns the way that we do, but we do. This is our language. And it's got relationships with many other languages around the world. It's a part of a very big language family. And all of those, or the majority of those, also have pronouns in gendered language. And that's also the term for gender. Gender is a linguistic term. It's not a biological term. When you look at the etymology of that, sex is a term that comes from science, and gender is a term that comes from linguistics, comes from language.
I see, right.
Is used to describe whether or not a specific language feature is masculine or feminine. And we don't say male or female, so D in German for,
Yes.
Die Frau is a female marker, and der Mann is a masculine, a feminine marker and a masculine marker, and these are the cases
They
that you can.
they have the neutral, don't you? Like das Mädchen,
Yes,
is that
that,
correct? Yes.
I would say die Mädchen, but
Die Mädchen. Well, what's the word for child? Because I think that they use the neutral.
das Kind,
Yeah, for a child, yeah.
Yeah. And so there's lots of different cases, and you find gendered language in varying degrees in different languages. So Latin languages are heavily gendered. Almost everything that you interact with is either masculine or feminine, and it has a different prefix and a different suffix to match. So you wouldn't say, for example, if you had a dog, el perro, you wouldn't say la pera for the dog because it's a boy dog. So you always change your language to match whatever
Right.
you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Some items come with their
So you pick all this up as a child, when you're in the environment where that language is being spoken, you pick all that up, and
yeah,
and you've got it kind of embedded by the time puberty comes along or something, and then
Yeah, so by the time that we're five in English, between 5 and 6, we've basically got the grammar down. You can, at that point, you can say he, she, we, I, it. So
Right.
little children sometimes get it wrong, but then you'll often see them correct themselves, or they check with mum, or everything about
Mm.
the child, especially from birth to 5, is about language acquisition. They
Yeah.
just want to do it, and they do certain things at certain times, and they stare right into your face. And mothers are uniquely equipped to be responding to this. Our brains and our bodies change in ways that allow us uh, to have a greater ability for a theory of mind, which is the ability to ascribe feelings and emotions to other people. Our facial recognition goes up during pregnancy so that we can identify our own babies, I'm assuming. But also we're really driven to look at faces, and so that
Sorry, you mean women in particular, or women
women
who
in
have?
particular,
Right.
women who experience pregnancy, all women come with this capacity.
Yeah.
During
Is
pregnancy,
that more so than men?
yes,
Right.
yes. Well,
In general.
in general, so women have the capacity for carrying a child,
Mm.
and our bodies and physiology changes during pregnancy to allow for this communicative relationship, as well as a protective one, a nurturing relationship. And the hormones that we're washed with during pregnancy, especially in our brains, change the structure of our brains to allow the grey matter actually shifts quite significantly, and it lasts for up to 2 years postpartum, post childbirth, and possibly longer. And of course, this happens every time that you have a baby. And what seems to be the case is that the greater the amount of changes in the brain, the less likely you are to experience postpartum depression. So, this is about bonding, it's about relationships, it's about
Mm.
nurturing, it's about communication, and that this
Mm.
dyad of mother and baby that midwives talk about, because that's who they're caring for in that relationship. They care for the mother and the baby. They're actually looking after two people already. And it's their job to find that balance between what's going to be okay for the baby and what's going to be okay for the mother. And they have to try and walk that line all the time, because it is such a connected relationship. And so when we have our children and our brains have been washed with all these hormones and things, and we've got our baby, we're really set on looking at their faces, and they look at our faces, and they watch what we say, and they watch how our mouths move, and they move your hair out of the way so they can watch even more closely, and we talk to them by instinct, come on, this is how they learn the cadence of their language. They learn the sounds, and it's gentle, and we all do it. It's instinctive.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then and bit by bit, they pick up where things go, and what they're actually learning is the grammar with a bit of vocabulary, and they're learning all the words that describe everything in their immediate environment and who the people are, and their family, and that's the relationship that wokeism, or the DEI ideologies around the world
Mm.
attempting to destroy, is the structure of the family, which is uh, it's a biological and
Mm.
very ancient system of support and
Mm.
love and nurturing. This is how human beings do it, basically.
It's listening to you speak, and then realizing what this midwifery council scope of practice has got there. It's almost looks sinister. Um, and I mean, I didn't think of that at first. At first, I thought it just looked stupid. But
Yeah.
now listening to what you're saying, I'm thinking, wow, I'm seeing that it's actually sort of breaking down
Yes.
the this it's breaking down the relationship. I mean, they think that they're being, well, I'm not don't know what they think, but the blurb is that they're being inclusive and all that sort of thing. But because none of the scope from what I can see, like speaks to you. It's all quite sort of vague and what I don't quite know how to explain it. But even me, you know, I mean, I'm a person who hasn't had children. I mean, I chose that, and I look at this and I think, well, I don't see how that can speak to anybody. How you can read that and think, this is me. I'm in here.
Yes, well, the only people that it speaks to are other ideologues, and you know the very disturbed women who believe that they're men and want to have babies, and you know after they've removed their breasts. And
let's just say that about that there's been estimated we have about 6 of those per year in New Zealand, and this is what they're changing the language for. Well, this is who they're changing the language for, I should say.
yes, I mean, I think it's true to say that the women who believe this about themselves, that they were born in the wrong body and they're actually men, but who are still driven by female imperatives. You know, they really want to have babies and they want to. The biological clock is still ticking, and they've got to go through this. I don't know how you maintain your sanity, and I suspect that you're already teetering on the verge of insanity anyway, because you've got such severe mental health problems. You know, if you're chopping off your breasts, you
Well,
really.
I mean, I agree. I think I think a lot of people are puzzled by this. You think that how can a woman who's so desperate to be a man, and that she goes to the extent of, you know, radical double mastectomy, and then wants a baby.
Yeah, and
It just, you know, I think people just cannot align those two things.
can't, and because it's not alignable. You know, men don't have babies, so
No.
fact, you know, sorry
Yeah.
about it, guys, you know, we love you, but you can't have babies. And so that's you know, that cognitive dissonance. This is why they start going a bit mental and saying, oh, well, you know, we can't have any pink in the maternity ward, and I don't want to see the word mother, and I don't want to see any pictures of pregnant women. I'd like to see some pictures of pregnant men. Thank you very much. You know, all of this, because of course, the moment that they start doing this, trying to have a baby, God, that poor baby, that's another story.
Yes, I
The
wonder about them.
you know, must drive you mad. And
And let's
so,
not forget that some of this language is also for the men who say they're women, because
well,
they don't want to be reminded that they
that's what I
can't
was,
be mothers.
yeah, I think that ultimately, you know, that's this number of 6 to 12 women who go through this experience every year in New Zealand. Um, you know, they're kind of like, or to my mind anyway, they are an adjunct to the real goal here, which is about making men mothers. Nobody actually cares about the women who want to. They're a bit of an anomaly. Nobody understands them. Nobody really
Mm,
cares.
mm.
You know, they're a great kind of poster child for, oh, we can be whatever we want, and you know, men can be babies, but they're actually being used just like everybody else, to exemplify that women are on board with this idea that men can be mothers, and that's what it's really all about, is men's fetishes and men wanting to be able to do this, to have life, to experience breastfeeding, to experience, you know, growing a baby in the womb.
And if you
Or
change the language, then you're not saying no, you can't do this. You know, if you change the language, you're sort of almost saying, oh yeah, well, you know,
yeah,
you
and
can
that's where they're being
do
inclusive.
this.
You know, and they believe this, and that's why it's so difficult to communicate with them, because they're in a cult and this is cult language and it's interfered with their cognitive processes, and they're not safe or rational anymore on the Midwifery Council. They're completely, totally captured by these ideas, which include, I think of it, you know, we've got this kind of tripartite view of ourselves that's across cultures and across different religions and spiritual beliefs and all.
So what do you mean by tripartite?
So we think of ourselves, we think of ourselves as sort of mind, body, and soul, you know, and this is expressed in different ways all over the place. And I think of the this DEI ideology as kind of it's also tripartite. You've got your queer theory, you've got critical race theory, and then social justice theory or equity theory, which is just essentially chopping off some people's legs to make everybody equal, you know, the same height, and that's not really justice.
Yeah, and a manner of speaking, in case anyone actually thinks that gets done.
Yes, a manner of speaking, yes, so to speak, yes. Although, you know, as we understand, and some of us are watching these developments with a great deal of alarm because they follow a trajectory that we've seen before, about free speech and control and denial of biological reality, and that never ends well. It ends with violence, and it ends with societal realignment, and it ends with authoritarian and totalitarian and fascist type governments coming in and attempting to impose ideologies on people. And there's always a resistance that builds, and some people will go along with it. And what I've noticed is that that people who were perhaps inclined to conform anyway have gone full bore for this. You know, yes. They want to belong more. That's their guiding.
Yes, I have heard that sort of excuse me, that sort of thing. Like, you know, they've people who are like highly compliant and those who just are oppositional because it's in their nature. You know, you can say anything to them and they'll have to disagree or go and do the opposite thing or something. And I mean, I have considered myself to be on the highly compliant side of things.
Yeah.
And for me to start seeing that something's wrong, I always consider, okay, there must really be something wrong.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think that I mean, I've always had a bit of an anti-authoritarian kind of streak to me, you know. If you tell me that I'm not allowed to do something, I instantly want to go and do it.
Yeah.
I don't always, you know, because sometimes it's really good advice not to. but
I'm finding I'm self-developing that a bit more now. The anti-authoritarian streak, yes.
Yeah. And coming back to language, it also has something to do with language. You know, and I've got various theories about that, which I won't go into necessarily here, but it does. Woke speak, for want of a better description, and I do have a couple of names in mind, but I haven't quite sussed them. But the woke speak is the vector for.
So what do you mean by a couple of names, like people's names, or?
No, so woke speak isn't my favorite terminology.
Oh, I see. Yes.
To call it.
Yeah.
I just
because everyone will understand it, we'll use it.
Everyone will understand it, we'll use it. So this kind of language, it doesn't follow the usual syntactic rules of speech, of English speech. We've started to rearrange things, and one really good example of this, and you can kind of see something ugly in here, and we'll come back to the sinister bit, is people of colour is one. Now, restated, this is just coloured people, which is something we stopped saying. You know, this is an Americanism, of course, but we stopped saying this after the Martin Luther King years. We stopped calling people coloured people because it's not necessary to point out people's individual colours, you know. There were lots of different reasons for that, but now we're back again with people of colour, you know, and the syntactic change to put the name and the adjective around the other way was sold to us by postmodernists and the like, and policy developers and these sorts of people. Was sold to us on the basis that if you put the adjective after, people will see the humanity of coloured people first.
Oh, they
It,
see the person
the person,
first.
not the colour.
Right.
You
Okay.
know, what that says to me is that the people who were developing this saw only colour and couldn't figure out how to not see only colour, you know. And they still do. And as soon as you say person of colour, this is what you're saying. You're saying, you know, you're pointing out the colour of the person. It's actually a really, really incredibly racist thing to say. But and it's very revealing about what you're, you know, what you see, whether or not you put the adjective first or second. But because it's got the adjective second, it confuses people. They think that they're being sensitive, and so they begin to adopt this language. Now, as soon as you start using it, woke speak is the vector for the ideology, and it acts like an executive command. So as soon as you malware on a computer, so as soon as you start speaking this way, every time that you do it, you fire off another executive command in your brain. And this is what's happened to the Midwifery Council, is they've all sat around for 4 years going, oh, and speaking this language, and now their brains are just turned into soup. You know,
let's just reiterate that this revised scope of practice took 4 years to put in place, and it's 1 page long. It's an A4 size piece of paper. It took 4 years. The original plan was for it to take 2 years, and they had a budget of like $377,000 for 2 years. It took 2 more years. So I don't know. No one knows quite how much it cost in the end. But I mean, I don't think that $500,000 cost in the end is out of is a silly figure to say.
I don't think so. And I don't think that they were thinking terribly hard about saving money.
No, of course not. It's a gravy train, isn't it? I mean, we all know this. The wokery, and I'll speak about that widely, has been an absolute gravy train for the last several years.
It is. It's an absolute gravy train. George Parker is, one of the Victoria University queer theorists who consulted on the Midwifery Council, is already out there trying to drum up more funding. You know, this is a possible research stream. She said it in her writing, you know, I want, you know, let's see if we can generate some research, because she gets $180,000 every time she goes, I'm queer.
I can say that I have spoken to somebody who's involved in midwifery, and she has basically sort of said the same thing, that they have put proposals forward about some research or studies they can do, and they get rejected time after time after time. And yet George Parker, she puts something in and bam, she gets it.
And that's the thing that people need to understand, is that that all of the people who have gone woke, they're not themselves. You know, that's probably the kindest thing I can say about them, is that they're not thinking like normal people anymore. You know, woke speak is really, really bad for you. It overlays your ordinary cognitive processes with
a rewiring of some sort.
It's more like a mirror, how it works. So if you think of your neural cortex, you know, your ordinary operating system, which is an incredible system, they're trying at the moment to recreate neural networks with AI, and they can't do it. You know, it's not they're just not the same. They're just not as good. And as our own natural evolutionary, they never will be. You know, it's no matter how
it's too complex for AI to.
It's too complex for AI to recreate. And they're obviously continuing on, and I'm sure they'll come up with something, a facsimile, but it will never have the creativity that the human brain and human language has. And the other thing I don't think that people really understand about language is that there are living languages and dead languages. And we do kind of know this. We know that Latin, for example, is a dead language, that it'll never be spoken again. And what that means is that when we speak our languages and they're alive, they change in and of themselves. You know, they're almost like a separate feature. It's like saying, oh yes, you know, I'm in charge of, we think we're in charge of our language because we can decide what to say, but actually we're just as much in control of our language as we are of the beat of our heart. You can't actually, it's its own thing, if you like. And it as a collective, our languages change over periods of time, and new words come and they go, and
Yes.
and all of that.
There's an evolution, isn't there, of language, basically. Yeah.
It's an evolution, and this is why we have Freudian slips, and we can catch ourselves doing, you know, because it comes out without our conscious control a lot of the time.
And one of those, I'll just give an example of one of those I always remember is many when in my youth, when I worked in a bar, and a man came in and he was missing a hand, and
Yeah.
he asked for a couple of beers or something like that, and the, the woman who was working with me said, "Oh, do you want a hand with those?" So, you know,
You know,
and so yeah, and he was cool, you know.
yeah, of course.
And of course, it's only and she didn't sort of go, "Oh, gasp! Oh, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry." She just, you know, just let it go. It's only afterwards that we both sort of looked at each other.
yeah, I mean, because it's really easy to have happen, right? So
Yeah,
you've got this living system in our heads all the time. This incredible system that, and if you're an English speaker, you've got words from just about every language, you know, or that's an exaggeration, but you've got a lot of words to call on that don't necessarily. So we've got Greek words, Arabic words, Latin words,
yeah.
you know, and all the derivatives thereof of the Latin words. And our alphabet is originally Arabic, and all certainly part of it is, and maths and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
English is an incredible language made of lots of different ones. And so you've got a lot of expression to call on as an English speaker, and that's true of all languages. You can be as creative as you like, but I'm a bit attached to English, perhaps, you know, as my own language.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's kind of unusual, and it's got some cool features. But when the getting back to the Midwifery Council and how this works. So you've got your executive, you've started speaking woke speak, you know, 4 years ago. Some of them, those midwives on that council, they said, "Over my dead body will I take the words out for women." And then 4 meetings later, they changed their mind.
Ah, what
Now,
happened there?
well, what
Oh,
happened?
was it like a threat of job loss?
No, no, it wasn't. It was that they were re-educated,
Oh.
and they
They got the marketing speak, in other words, and it's very,
yeah,
very good, very good. I
it's
mean,
very good. They got hammered. One of the things that's happening in New Zealand is that, and the other, as part of in the Anglosphere generally, so New Zealand, Australia, Canada, these are the three countries that we might think of as being like this. And you can also see it in the UK that England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales have gone harder for it than the UK.
yes,
And so we obviously have some kind of unique vulnerability. And in New Zealand, what we're particularly vulnerable to is the critical race theory element of this tripartite group of theories, which altogether is called wokeism. And the critical race theory component, God, it's awful. It's so awful. And that's what's happened to the midwives. They the ones that said, you know, "Over my dead body," blah, 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 and then 4 meetings later went, "Oh, actually, yeah, no, actually."
yeah.
They
I can see how this is kind and inclusive.
yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that it was you know. And so what's happened is that they've been told that this is the way for Māori. This is what is going to be good for Māori, and you know, that to not do this means that they're not being proper treaty partners, and they're actually
yes.
racist, and all of this, you
As
know.
I said, it's a very good sell. It's
It's
a
a
very
really
good
good
sell.
sell.
Yeah.
It works on people it works very well on Pākehā who don't want anyone to find out about all the racist jokes they used to make. They don't want anyone to find out that they don't know anything and they haven't got any Māori friends. It works really well on those women, you know. They want to demonstrate that they're not racist, you know. They want to be kind, and you know that it's incredibly powerful, and this is
that kind of thing works really well on women.
Yeah,
we seem to be wired, I put it bluntly, we seem to be wired to be suckers for a sob story. And
I think we're wired to be communicators. We communicate differently. We also do childcare, you know. It's about the way that women interact with each other. And we interact differently to men in our social groups, you know, and there are relationships. Friendship is incredibly important to women. We have to have our friends, you know. We have to have that woman to talk to unburden to. We're different, you know, and that's okay. But it, like anything, you know, you've got your yin and your yang, and there's always a downside to the things that make us great, which is about networking. You know, women have a superpower in our networking. We're good communicators, and we care about our societies, we care about our communities. We are, with our children, the beating heart of any society. Without us, you haven't got a community.
So just to go back to what I said about suckers for a sob story, and I just want to sort of expand on that a little bit to say that it's about the more natural empathy we have, which is very important for human survival.
Yes,
but you know, as you say, it can be exploited and get taken to extremes and stuff like that. So going back to, as you say, that you know, it's all relevant to how we communicate and network and listen to each other's, you know, woes and problems and stuff like that.
Yes, and we're designed to have a theory of mind. We're good at this, you know, to try and put ourselves in the place of someone else and see what they're feeling. You know, this is a natural thing for us to want to do. But of course, what they don't realize they're doing is extending this to a cult. And so this comes back, and what winds up happening is that women wind up hurting themselves, which is a common feature of our lives. You know, we do give away all of this, the strength that we've got, and the society that we live in is abused all of the time. So we're
so used to taking on other people's problems. You know, like women's environments are considered an acceptable dumping ground for a problem, because, you know, like, women are, generally speaking, less violent, you know, physically violent. I'm not saying that we can't be nasty and aggressive in other ways, but we're less physically violent, and it's a safe environment to sort of just go and dump a problem into.
And we'll take it, you know, and I mean, I'm sure that you do it as well, and I certainly provide that for people, a place to dump, you know. But I've learned also not to let other people's emotions. I don't get involved necessarily. I just provide a place for people to vent.
Well, one of the joys of getting older, Sarah, is that you become less like that.
Yes, you know, and this is something I hope young women will learn as well. And I see that this. I mean, I also don't have any respect for the Midwifery Council, because I know that when you make these decisions, I don't want anyone to find out about all the racist jokes I used to make, and I feel really bad about that, and I don't know anything, I'm being told, and all of that. That's just, I think that's really self-absorbed and cowardly and gross.
I mean, no one is exempt from having done that.
That's right. You know,
no, it doesn't matter what culture, what race you come from. No one's exempt from having done
that. And people are, you know, when you want to go and learn about something, you don't learn about it in a Midwifery Council Zoom meeting. It takes time, you know, to learn other people's cultures. Any culture, you've got to actually go and interact, and spend time, and because there are different rules, there are different manners, there are different all kinds of things, and you actually have to, they talk a lot in the Midwifery Council, and Judith Makara Cooper, one of the project teams, who's a very, very qualified midwife, she's got this video up on their scope of practice page that they deleted so that nobody could see what they were doing. She's got this video up there, and I've got that link. I went and got a Wayback Machine link straight away as soon as they deleted it. So it's back on the Substack post that I did.
On your Substack?
You can get to the old scope of practice with the Te Reo Māori version and the English version side by side, and their whole page and all the links that they use, all the information that they did in the cult language and all of that. It's all there.
I'll put the link to your Substack in the description underneath this, so people can go and look.
Yeah, to look. And it's just highlighted the scope of practice, I think, in the first 1 or 2 paragraphs. And if you click on that, it takes a little bit to load because it's the Wayback Machine and it's quite a big page, but it does load, and then you can go see all this information for yourself. And they've got these videos up, and Judith, she's in that ecstatic place that cult people get into, and she's in the video and she's going, "You've got no idea of the lessons and the gratitude and the this and the that," and it's really disturbing to watch, because what she's talking about bears absolutely no resemblance to the real thing in terms of Te Reo Māori as a language. Or
I have found that in general, when people refer to them loosely to like wokery or neo rainbow, anything, it's all so gushy.
Yes.
So gushy, and it's like they just want to swamp anything else with all this gushiness, gush it out and just drown anything else.
Well, what I've come to believe about woke speak, so I'll get this little theory out because sure. and I'm developing it as we go.
This is very interesting.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting,
I'm riveted.
But it's developing as I go. This hypothesis, it's a hypothesis, not a theory as yet, and I think it's not bad. So you've got your base operating system underneath, which is incredible, it really is. It's amazing. And for your neural network. And then you come along with your woke speak and you start speaking it, and you enter your executive command, which is just like malware in a computer. Every time you click on, once your browser's infected, every time you click on the button, it sends another command. Okay, destroy this file, destroy that file, destroy this file. And that's how woke speak works. And it works like an overlay. So you start speaking it, and you instantly you put the overlay over your whole neural cortex. And it's a little bit like in terms of cultural references, we've got Black Mirror and the Matrix. And Black Mirror, if you think of it, there's a mirror underneath this overlay, and all of the and it looks kind of right to the brain, almost right, like the Matrix did. The colors are just a little bit wrong and the edges are a little bit wrong, but close enough.
Yeah.
And then you start to speak this woke speak, your executive command is activated. You've got this new mirror, which on this time around, because it's also it's not just the first time that this particular virus has spread, but this time it's got rainbows underneath the mirror. So that's what your brain is seeing now, your neural network, and so you start to speak your woke speak, and it redirects whatever topic you're on. It redirects your meaning and category, and meaning network away from the base operating system and everything you've ever understood, and it filters it through this mirror, which goes through now into your cognitive function, your frontal lobe. This is where we make decisions, process information, determine what's right and wrong, and all of that. But all of the information that's going there is wrong because it's been redirected through this overlay.
Yeah.
So people, what tends to happen is that you've got this, suddenly people have got cognitive dissonance because it doesn't make sense with, the original is still under there, especially in the beginning. People start to have, they start questioning themselves in the first instance. Am I a racist? Am I a homophobe? that certainly happened to me, you know, when all this was first going around. I was thinking, I don't agree with this. You know, I really don't agree with this. What does this mean? You know, does this mean that I'm carrying
Yeah.
around some sort of thing I
I
didn't
think
even...
that one of the classics, so we'll get back to the scope. One of the classics I think at the moment is the drag queens, the drag queen story time in libraries. Now, once we all knew that drag queens were adult entertainment, you know, and that they stayed in their lane, you know, they stayed in the clubs and in the adult world and stuff like that, because, you know, like drag queens are parodying women, and often sexualized parody of women, and often a stupid parody of women, you know. Well, that's what parody is, of course, you know, but, you know, ridiculous, you know, making ridiculous, making a woman ridiculous. And now they have come and talked to children, story time in libraries, and all this thing about them being adult entertainers has gone somehow. And parents are bringing their children along because it's just a fun time. You know, and all this thing we knew once about, you know, what the you know, scratch the surface, what this all means, what a drag queen means is being overlaid, it's overlaid by this woke speak.
It's exactly right, and it is. It's overlaid, and so once that the malware has a specific code as well, and it's not a very nice one, and it's DEI DEI DEI, and that just, your brain rearranges this. It's an anagram, and it means die. And so this is what we're pumping into our brains, and that goes straight down into the frontal. Think, you know, like we're being pumped venom straight into our brains, telling us to die. So, you know, when what we're seeing all over the world is nihilism, despair, you know, people are going, we're a virus on the planet, we should all die, and nobody should have children, and we're evil, and we're monsters. And some people are chopping bits off their bodies, other people are going mad altogether, some people can't communicate with their families anymore. You know, this is really bad for us, speaking this way. And it's not us that's a virus. It's that we've got, you know, and we've got something bad going on for us, and I believe that it's old. I think that it's happened lots of times. But so that's basically the thing, you know, that's happening. And what I notice is that in the early stages of this, Stella O'Malley, I believe, has this euphoric look about her. Dr. George Parker certainly does. So does Judith McArthur Cooper. And, you know, some of these people who, especially the women who go woke, in the early stages, they're very euphoric. It's almost like a drug, you know, that you've mainlined your heroin and you're having a great time at the moment, but it's not going to last, you know.
It's the honeymoon or something like that, isn't it? You know,
right. Yeah. And they do get this very euphoric look, and you can actually see a physical, their body language is really strange, you know, and it's because this overlay, they're not actually accessing the mainframe anymore, and they can't remember anything. And the other thing that happens with this code is that the specific command, die, 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 it's also, it's like the nothing in the never-ending story. It comes along and it eats your memories. It eats your stories. You're not allowed to say your stories anymore. You're not allowed to say your words anymore. Not allowed to talk about where you're from or who you are, or if you're from, you know, over there from the UK, well, you definitely don't want to be talking about that, you know, because that's really bad. And that's your critical race theory element coming in.
Yes. And especially like, you know, like in a simple version, you know, the attack on statues. And and we know that you know, some of these men who had statues made with them, you know, you scratch the surface and they don't have particularly good
no, awful
past and stuff like that.
You know.
But you know, some of them, of course, but you know, times were different.
Well, not only that, but it's perfectly acceptable to update context. You know, it would be fine to put a new plaque up and say, you know, let's add a bit of extra context to this historical window. Then people can come along and you get doubly educated. This is great, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good idea.
But but what's happening, of course, is that people aren't allowed their stories because they've got this language virus, this parasite in their brain, and so it's throw the statue into the river. And it's all about, and you can see the historical.
It's all about destroying, isn't it? It's all about destroying.
It's incredibly destructive. People need their stories. We really need our stories. We need to know who we are. We tell our stories to our children. This is what we do. We pass on all of it. And so what you wind up with is a shattered people who have no story. And that's not good.
They only have the story, the authoritarian story, the story
only have one story. Which is a really horrible story. And so, of course, people and lots of people are really struggling. I've got friends who can hardly leave the house because they think they're so racist, and so homophobic, and they're not. They're not.
Right.
They're
just ordinary flawed people.
Ordinary flawed people who can grow and learn. And what's happening is that their stories of who they are, they're being told that they're garbage. And they should never speak about their stories. And as far as I can see, from my perspective, this is the same function as rabies. That when you have rabies, you attempt to bite other people to give them rabies too.
Right. Yeah.
And this woke speak, that's what it does. You get word rabies. You try and force other people to speak this way too.
Yeah. Hey, so this scope, like now, just sort of hearing what you're saying, and that, so the scope, which is supposedly what midwives have to base their practice on, so they're getting all this into their head, and now they're going to start telling that to their clients, like imparting it to their clients, just with the way that they talk, and if their clients, with these women who are pregnant, stray from the script, these midwives might actually sort of tell them off or correct them.
Yes, correct. It's like the Ministry of Education saying, if you get it wrong, don't worry, correct yourself and try and do better next time. When you're referring to girls as menstruators, if you can't remember to call girls menstruators or people with periods, don't worry. You can get it right next time. Do better next time. This is very disturbing, very authoritarian language that the government is using on us. Do better next time.
The previous government, well, sorry, not the government so much now, but the government departments, because it was very nice to hear. Was it Erica Stanford talking about women and girls just recently in Parliament when they were putting period products into schools? And they were, and she actually sort of talked about, actually used the word, I think, young woman or girls, and that, which I think hadn't been done for a wee while by a government minister.
Yeah, it is nice to have this new government, the coalition government.
For that, anyway.
Yeah, for that. What concerns me a little bit, and I won't talk too much about this, but it's probably a different discussion, but what concerns me a little bit is that it's easier for New Zealanders, I think, and people generally, especially parents, to see what's wrong with the gender woo, with the queer theory, because it's about our children and protecting them from monsters who want to rape them, or buy them or mutilate them, or that we're protecting our children from that, and that's good. That's our job and what we should be doing. And but what worries me a little bit is that New Zealanders are hopeless at recognizing critical race theory. We just don't. That most of us just don't get it. And so what I see happening is that a lot of women who are gender critical are completely captured by critical race theory. Okay. So at the same time that they're going, oh, it's great for women, and this is really bad for women and children and blah blah blah, then the very next day you see them out there going, it's be kind, be tolerant, down with the government, and all of that, and it's the same philosophy, but they can't see it, and they've forgotten what what the promise of New Zealand could be, and who our friends are and who our relationships are, and that most of us are actually connected at this point, you know, to someone who and most Māori have someone Pākehā in the family, and we, you know, it's not what they think and it's not what they're saying, and that worries me, because I think that what is likely to happen is that we'll get rid of the majority of the queer theorists, and then we'll go full critical race theory and social justice equity theory, and you know, that's just as bad.
I notice in this in the revised scope of practice, and it's probably in the revised scope of practice as well, that they do say that the, oh my goodness me, if I can pronounce it, the kahu pokai / midwife values, how do you spell it? Mataranga Maori? And other world views. And I think, well, what world views? They don't specify them. It's just other world views. Yeah. And that kind of intrigued me a bit, because I just sort of think you don't need to say that to a midwife, surely. That they just, when they have a client, that they're receptive to what that client's culture is, and they will try and just, you know, accommodate it. But here it's they're really sort of imposing the Maori world, even though they say other world views. What they're actually doing is imposing a Maori worldview.
Well, what they're actually doing is imposing a facsimile of a Māori worldview.
A facsimile, yes.
Much, much worse. And that's what concerns me about critical race theory, is that, so all these women are going, oh my God, my story is shit, I need a new one. And they're snatching at Mātauranga Māori and trying to wear it for their own, and they never can, because they don't understand it, and it's not theirs, and it's a different story altogether. And
yes. And even me saying what I said before, would that they would be sort of saying, oh, you know, I'm saying I'm being racist and everything about saying about daring to sort of being a little bit critical about this this wording and the scope of practice.
Yes, and it's because they've got such an attachment at this point to this way of life being the not racist way, and they're not racists. No, 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 no. You know, and to me, I think that's really craven, and I find it really, I get quite, I'm quite nauseated by it, because I want them to stay away from my children. I want them to stay away from my children's whānau, you know, to get back with your mutilated story and your horrible, patronizing, condescending, I'm the white, you know, it's just white saviorism gone mad, essentially. And nobody needs that. Nobody asked for that. I don't have many Māori friends who are going, come and save us. I don't have any, actually. You know.
No, because I mean, if you did have those, they wouldn't really be friends. All they would be is like people to enhance your image in a way that you're not racist, you know.
That's exactly what they're doing, and they're using Māori culture and you know, words and language and concepts, and that's what you can see Judith talking about. She's talking about all the lessons that she's learned from her 4 Zoom meetings or whatever. She now understands Mātauranga Māori, you know, like, get away from me, Judith, you're crazy. You know, that's not how you learn other people's cultures. And you have to be invited to do that. You don't just march on in and say, oh, I'm having a learn now.
Teach me anything. You know, one of the other things, talking about sort of linguistics and you know, how they worded to get into your head and stuff like that. One of the things I'm finding now is one of the favorite phrases from wokery is, there's nothing to fear.
Oh, yes.
They're coming out with that quite a bit now. You see it just tagged on to, you know, different MPs, Green MPs in particular, you know, and from other organisations, and they're blah, blah, blah. There's nothing to fear from blah, 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 you know. And I think, yes, that's the popping that in now.
Yes, yes, and it's you know, you talked about it being sinister before, and it's all very sinister, and that is a good example of it, you know, because there's nothing to fear is a that we hear that from when we're little. It's okay, don't be scared.
Yes,
This is a very
yes,
powerful thing to say to human beings.
yes. Mm.
And they're not being specific about which bit they don't want you to fear, but what they're really talking about in New Zealand and in New Zealand context, when they say, you know, there's nothing to fear, it's about the Māori culture aspect of it. And
Most,
generally.
yes, yes. I think I've heard it in quite a not quite a few times, a few times in that context.
Yes, you know,
Yes.
and I would just say that there is something to fear. You know, the fear for me is that if I was to suddenly go woke, which is not going to happen, but let's just say that I did, my fear now, looking at that as a situation, is that I would become the example of everything I would never want to be. I would be being condescending, racist, you know, appropriating someone else's culture and mutilating it for my own self-esteem.
Well, I
Um,
promise, Sarah, that if you ever go woke, I'll come and get you and put you into a deprogramming
yes, please.
program.
Please come and get me. I don't want to stay there. You know, my main cortex will be going, um,
We'll come and kidnap you
yes,
and force you into some sort of deprogramming
yes, yes. And, you know,
program. That's what you
um,
call it.
yeah. And I do think, you know, because it is so sinister and so awful, and the logical endpoint of this kind of thinking is that you can justify any kind of behavior to keep this alive, you know. So that means sending people to gulags and executing people, and that's the logical endpoint of this kind of thinking. And at the moment, all that's happening is that if you paint over the rainbow crossing, and you're the wrong kind of organized about it,
Yeah.
you're going to get charged with a hate crime, you know, and they're chasing those people really hard, partly because
Oh,
it's being
yeah.
organized
If you
and
can
that,
put righteous, you can put righteous language on anything. You
yeah,
can justify anything.
justify anything, and they've got all these code words, you know, safety and neurodiversity and cultural
Oh,
safety,
yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
safety is my 2024 woke word, because it's just being
It's just been hammered. Yeah.
being safety, you know.
So let's talk a bit about this scope,
Yeah.
because now the scope, as I said, the scope of practice for midwives is like is an important document for them. It's like what they have to adhere to, isn't it? They have to adhere to that, otherwise they can be chastised for it if it's considered they're not adhering to the scope of practice, and go up before the council or whatever. Um, and midwives have to apply to have their license renewed every year, which I believe now is like around about $700 or something. So if they're considered to perhaps not be following the scope in some way, that there's been a complaint laid against them or whatever, they can have their renewal of their license refused. Um,
Yes.
so this scope is not just sort of merely a set of words, that are a bit silly. It's actually a really important document for midwives. And the first revised scope just didn't even have the word, was it mother and babies in it?
Yeah, it didn't have any words for women in it. It had
Just having a look at it here.
yeah, no breastfeeding, no woman, no mothers, no childbirth, no child, no baby. The only reference to infant was sort of tacked on at the end of, I think it was clause H or I forget what, one of the ones at the end, where they're talking about how a midwife may like to undergo continuing education in wider sexual and reproductive health care or infant health care. And
Right.
infant is a term that it's not actually, so midwives are, and Deb Hayes has talked a lot about this, that, and other midwives too, that a midwife's role, she's actually only paid and contracted to care for babies up to 6 weeks, babies and mothers
Yeah,
6 weeks
yeah.
after birth. which is a baby, but infant actually refers to a child up to 12 months.
Right.
So already that's outside of the scope of practice of a midwife. By law, they don't do that. And the other thing about that particular phrase is that I was quite interested, and I wasn't the only one to notice, judging by the feedback, what's the difference between sexual and reproductive health care for a midwife. So I looked this up, and these two terms, sexual and reproductive health, used to be relatively interchangeable in a health context, and it encompasses things like whether or not a woman has autonomy about whether or not she wants to have sex right now or not, or whether or not she's already got 4 children and is interested in contraception, for example, or whether or not there are, sexually transmitted diseases at play that need to be managed. These kinds of things are the kinds of things that midwives and women might discuss on a private level, because this is the relationship between the midwife and the woman, and the midwife's job is to care for this mother, and ensure that her body and to the best of their ability, that her body and kind of psychic state, if you like, kind of overall emotional and stability is as good as it can be in the context of your family. But what it means now is, of course, when you follow this up, is that they've divided these two things. Reproductive health focuses solely on contraception and conception and how to achieve it, and that include putting a uterus in a man, which is about 10 years away from being a reality, according to the people who are trying very hard to do it. That's reproductive health, and how to get them to.
Sorry, let me just stop you. That's reproductive health according to the Midwifery Council, or according to
world, women's health bodies around the world, and it comes from
this reproductive. Put this into reproductive health, right?
So this is now reproductive health, is really about conception and how men can conceive and feed babies. Although they say it's for the women, but we only get a couple of paragraphs and then we're back into the And sexual health is all about sexuality and gender, and making sure that the woman is having a marvelous time in the bedroom, which that's not a midwife's job, to explore whether or not they're enjoying it. Obviously, there's, if a woman is being coerced into sex, a midwife is going to be, they're pretty sensitive women, they're feeling onto it. They can tell when a woman is being less than forthright or is nervous, or and they do have some context for when that might be the case. They get lots of paperwork. Certainly if you go and have your baby in a hospital, you get a big file, and that's filed away in the nurse's station, the midwife station, and everybody who has interaction with you has to write what they did in that. So everybody is very aware that perhaps this family has, domestic violence issues, or so people are kind of paying attention to what's going on. And our services are underfunded and struggling, and the midwives are certainly struggling because the Midwifery Council mandated, I think it's about 300 of them out for the jab. And they're charging some of them criminally, because they attended births when there was nobody else around and they weren't jabbed. And so rather than leave this poor woman to have her baby by herself, they went, and now they're being charged criminally through courts and things. So the midwifery workforce is struggling to keep up, So this is where you start to see sort of the slips and paperwork and things like that happen throughout the health service, that when all this wokery is applied, actually becomes very difficult and unwieldy, and go woke, go broke is the saying for a reason. This is why.
Wokery is very slippery, isn't it? Very slippery. I mean, yeah. And it's very hard to pin down to sort of meaning one thing, or providing clarity. It's very slippery. It's almost open to personal interpretation, a lot of it.
Well, it's defined that way. That's what postmodernism is. So all of these theories come from postmodernist. They're derived from postmodernist thinking, which is a philosophical. It's a philosophy. So that's where this is oozed out like green gas from underneath the doors of the philosophy departments and universities. There's nothing wrong per se with philosophy generally. We want philosophers. These are the people who ask difficult questions, and a lecture theatre is a safe place to do that in, and you can kind of imagine anything you like. And so postmodernism comes from there, but it's not supposed to be applied in the real world, you know.
No,
And
so it's got to stay in context,
in
you know.
context,
I
that's
think
right.
I've watched a very good listened to a very good podcast on Reality Check Radio just recently,
Yeah.
from a guy, and I don't know if I can pronounce it, T Matutua or
Oh,
something.
yes.
He's a he's an older Maori guy, not elder, but just an older Maori guy. He's been in academia. I think he's recently been on, only recently sort of come on X. And he said it's full of wise words. So I recommend you go and listen to it. And he said a very good thing. He said, we've replaced what works with what sounds good. And I thought that was very, very profound.
Yes, and I think that that's happened a number of times in New Zealand, you know, in different ways. But I mean, we've replaced, and the Midwifery Council is a good example of that, because midwifery in New Zealand is actually considered to be excellent, or was, you know, that
I think
women
was is the
the
right
world
word.
were really looking at New Zealand's midwifery model and thinking this is so great, because we've taken it for granted for a few decades now that if we want, when we're going to have a baby, our midwife will be free for a start, and that she will be, you know, we can have a lead maternity carer, a woman, who can come to us at hospital, or she can do a home birth, or, you know, there's this very woman-centered midwifery care in New Zealand that has been the envy of women around the world, certainly across the ditch in Australia. You know, they were talking about it when I was on WDI, you know, what's going on over there, and how much harder it is for women to have any kind of autonomy over birth and what happens to them.
Okay.
And so that's really sad. What Tima Tamo is saying is true in this context for the Midwifery Council, that what we had worked, you know, really well, and now getting doesn't work. So
Yeah.
there's
Replace it with what sounds good to the Midwifery Council.
the Midwifery Council. I mean, to me, it sounds like a dystopian horror show, but you know, and all it has done. The moment I read it, I was like, "This is there's something
all
wrong."
about it's all about, you know, the whānau. And for those who aren't in New Zealand, whānau is family, and they don't even mention in the original one, don't even mention the woman. It's all about somehow the whānau gets pregnant and has a baby.
Yes, and I think that's that this is it's a linguistic sleight of hand that I really object to, because before I'm aware that we're probably running out of time a little bit, but I
No,
just
that's
want
all
to go.
right. We'll carry on for a little bit longer. Yeah.
So there's two things. One is about this about the word whānau, and the other one is about the structure of the Midwifery Council and how big this actually is, and what it affects, the scope of practice. So I'll cover that as well. But the word whānau, it doesn't translate exactly to family.
No.
So what they're doing, and it's a little bit complicated, and sometimes I stumble over myself, but what they're doing is they're using whānau in the English version. Probably
Right.
makes slightly more sense in the Te Reo Māori version, but not much. But in the English version, the word whānau is being used as though it actually means family.
Yes.
But it doesn't. It doesn't mean that, in the sense that we use family, in the sense
Yes.
that in English we use family. We're talking about, in the main, our blood relations and the closest ones of them. And then we have other terms for, you know, extended family, or sometimes we do the little explanation where, well, she's not really my, you know, my auntie, but she helped raise me, so she's my family. I call her aunt. You know, we do this big kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas whānau, it has that extended family meaning to some degree. So it doesn't but it doesn't mean anybody you like. It really doesn't mean that. And that's how they're applying it. They're saying because they can't use family, because English speakers wouldn't accept that this is what family means, because it doesn't. They're that anybody can be a family. So you're the guy that's buying your baby for the surrogate is your family member. That doesn't work in English. So they've stolen whānau because it has this meaning that is slightly broader in a modern context for family. They're using that one and going, oh, well, we're going to do it like the Māori do it. You don't have to be related. You can just be, you can just be anybody. And that's not true. I am a member of Mana Wahine Kōrero, but I would never describe myself as whānau. I might say whanaunga, as a
that's sort of like the very broad sense of whānau. So like you're connected, but not, but distantly, sort of.
Well, I'm not a blood relation. I'm still an important person, but I don't share the same whakapapa. I don't share the same ancestry. I don't have the same story to tell about who I am. But I'm still a beloved person.
You're in the circle in a way.
Yeah. That's how I would maybe describe myself, and of course I always put this caveat on that the people to speak to about anything to do with reo Māori and so on are Di and Philippa and Karina and Rex, and
they also hate the Te Reo version of the scope of practice, don't they? They're really sort of quite incensed about that. Which is not something that you and I can really sort of discuss very much, but I just want to put that in there, that this Midwifery Council has created both a Te Reo and English version of the scope of practice, and funnily enough, they litter the English version with Maori words, even though there is a Maori version.
They're doing it very deliberately. They're doing that for a number of reasons. One, they have to demonstrate that they understand what is required of them as treaty partners, so they're forcing all the te reo in. They're also doing it because they can hide what they're doing in te reo Māori and using, just whānau. They can't get away with some of these things in English. Which is what most people speak, so they're putting it in, and anybody who says speak people, so many gender critical women are like, well, we're fine with whānau and we're fine with all the te reo. Well, no, you shouldn't be. You've got a language, you don't know what these words mean, and they're stealing them from someone else's language and changing them, and that's not what they mean, and you're just being a thief.
I think that they have traded on the fact, this is like people like the Midwifery Council traded on the fact that in New Zealand we did sort of just pop Maori words into our vernacular, here and there. And I think they're trading on that fact that was just what we did, and and putting these other words in.
New Zealanders are familiar with some words in the main, and certainly if we've got some words, whānau, puku, kai, that some of these words we know, and this is this is normal. This is that language change over time, and English is a borrower language. The quote is that English doesn't just borrow words, it pursues other languages down dark alleys and beats them unconscious and rifles their pockets with spare verbs, which is true.
That's quite a descriptive.
Yes, and we do this. If you've got words or stories, we want them. And this is, there's a reason that it's the language of the bard and all of that. We're into words. And we like to talk. And so this appropriation of words and changing of their meaning is a natural process, and it happens slowly, and the words that are appropriate fit. But this is not that. This is a linguistic attempt to redefine what these words mean, without telling anybody that that's what they're doing, that they're redefining them. I've seen throughout their language, I've seen them do things like use the word tikanga, for example, to mean quality and safety, which is a very strange way to translate that word. It really is. And it doesn't bring with it, when you translate it that way, it doesn't bring with it any of the concepts. When I think of tikanga in my mind, I know what that is, but when I think of it as quality and safety, it's a really different concept, and it doesn't have the meanings that it should have when you translate it that way. So that's what they're doing. And just coming back to whānau, so they've done this thing so that where they've forced the word whānau into English to mean family, in the sense that we would use family, so that they can get away with describing people who aren't family as family. But the other thing about this word is that family is the modern translation. Now, Te Mātamua, the chap that you were talking about on RCR radio, would know this, that whānau as a verb is actually a verb. It means to be born. And that's its original meaning, and the sense that it's used in is very different, or quite different, and it has other associated definitions. And the way that you can find this out, what I really recommend to everybody, is that you don't use a dictionary for te reo Māori that is printed after, say, 1995. Just don't. It's been infected with, well, I'm saying we've got to be very careful with Te Ara, our online encyclopedia. If you get any information from there about anything to do with Māori culture, history, language, anything like that, go away and triple check it with at least three other sources on the internet, and the older that they are, the better. Because these connections are being deliberately wiped out, and it's really important that we actually retain the meaning of these words through time, because what will happen if we don't is that it will all be lost and nobody will be able to find it. And as Google de-indexes everything that isn't one, it'll be gone forever.
So here's a message to everyone: is keep your books.
Keep your books, keep your old words, start talking, bring out all the words you remember from your childhood, bring out all the songs you remember from your childhood. This is the antidote. This is the way to, shine. I don't know if anybody, how many people have watched the Harry Potter movies, but at the final end, Dumbledore's dead, and the Voldemort's coming, and they're all attacking, and all the teachers go out, and the kids and everything, and they've got their wands and they're pointing up at the sky, and they make this shield, right, of light, and it's a cool kind of image. And this is what we actually need to do in our own minds. We need to make a little shield with all our words, and our stories and our songs and our art and our memories and everything that makes us us. You bring them all out, and it's like shining a light on this horrible rainbow thing that's pumping dye into our brains, and it breaks it. It actually breaks it, and it's important to remember that our base operating system is a trillion times more powerful than this crappy code. You can't run out of words, you can't run out of stories, you can't run out of who you are. If you don't know who your ancestors are, look them up and start talking about them. Keep your story, because that's what this whole thing is about, is trying to wreck our language, wreck our stories, wreck who we are, make us feel like shit, so that we'll accept this new revolting, evil, wicked story where have babies
with the promise of you'll feel much better if you take all this on.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, they do feel better, because the cognitive dissonance is so strong that you cannot really you can't sit in the middle. You get your people with your head in the sand. They're still holding on to, they're not quite sure, and they've got their head in their sand, but it'll come for them in the end. They'll have to make a decision one way or the other. But for some of us, we reject this outright, and the more that you reject it, the better you'll be, and the more personally honest you're able to be, and the braver you'll be, and the better you'll feel, because your brain's not being eaten by a virus, you know, by malware. So some people will do that. It's painful because you will lose all your friends who got captured, or, you know, or sometimes you all that, but it's worth it because you get to keep your brain, freedom, and you feel good about that. And other people go the other way. They resolve it by completely adopting this, and that's when you get the euphoria and the rabid, you must speak this way and all that.
I mean, ultimately, and this is another thing that so what was his name?
Martin. Yeah.
It's another thing he said. It was about truth. He said, and I might be misquoting him, he just said, you've got to be true or you're buggered. So
yeah, you've got to be honest, I think.
That, and I think that sometimes being honest with yourself is quite difficult. Yes. But if you can bring yourself to be brutally honest with yourself, and I don't mean to say like beating yourself up and, you know, into a pop, be brutally honest with yourself, the sting goes out of the fact that you're just a flawed human being.
Yeah, it's actually okay, you know, like we're all right, you know, we're I've got, God knows, I've got my flaws, you know, but
and
okay
be honest about them. It doesn't mean to say that you embrace them or anything like that, you know, but you're just honest about them.
Yes, you know, and the more you try and hide things and bury things and feel bad about things, it's actually true that the bigger they get because you're putting a lot of energy into them, you know.
And so actually it takes it so it takes less energy to be truthful and honest about things. And I mean, I know, and having said that, I know that we all tell, you know, like white lies, and we all sort of maybe skip over, you know, like smooth over some things sometimes and that, but ultimately, you know, it takes, just in general, takes less energy to be truthful and honest than it does to try and sort of do what this woke speak thing is doing to us, or to embrace that,
you know, and it's healthier, and your relationships get stronger with the people who value that, and it takes practice, you know, like it's not you practice your personal honesty, and for women it's very difficult, I think, especially, well, actually for men and women, to there's a space for honesty that is about being assertive, but it's not about being aggressive, and it's not about being passive aggressive either, you know. This place in the middle where you can be honest without being cruel, you know. You don't have to be an asshole to do that, and you also don't have to be servile to do that, you know. You can just be, and that's allowed. We're all pretty cool, and I think, you know, I like people, and I want to see people be happy, and I want to see them be confident to be who they are, because it's not easy when you're not like that.
And you know, and just on that note, you know, you need clear language to help that along, you know, and that's why. That's one of the reasons why this, you know, midwifery scope of practice, as I said at the beginning, is such a linguistic abomination, which I think, I'm not sure if you came up with that or I did, but anyway, it is. And on that note, we'll probably just wind up now, Sarah, and I shall, as I said, I'll put the link to your Substack below so people can go and read what you said. And it's a brilliant piece. It was widely shared and lauded, whatever that word is, amongst people. So it's well worth a read. And I will say now that Deb Hayes, who Sarah mentioned briefly before, she's a practicing midwife here in New Zealand, and she created a parliamentary petition about the scope of practice, because the scope of practice actually has to be passed by Parliament. It's not just something a Midwifery Council dreams up and then puts in place. It actually has to be passed by the Minister of Health. I'm not quite sure, but, you know, in Parliament it has to be passed as a regulatory document or something like that.
Well, I can. I'm sorry to interrupt you,
Katrina. Yeah, sure. No, so what if you know more about that? Let us know before I carry on.
I did want to do a brief bit about the structure, and I can include this.
Yes.
because Deb's petition is important. And there are a few ways to talk about this. So in terms of the structure of the Midwifery Council and what they actually are, they are a regulatory body that is provided for. They're called a body corporate. They're provided for in legislation under the Health Practitioners Competence Assurance Act 2003, which governs, there are various professions that have that are specialized, like physiotherapy or nursing or midwifery or whatever. And so the idea was with this legislation that they would create bodies corporate that would manage the education requirements and the practicing certificate requirements and do these things as an official body that was provided for, and all 18 of these bodies must come up with a scope of practice. And that scope of practice has to be updated. There's no, as far as I know, there's no specific period of years, but it had been a decade, or it'd been a while when they first decided to start doing this. The last one was in 2010, and that's a relatively reasonable document. It's written in English, and it would have been great if they had the Te Reo Māori version there. It's always, I think it's good that we've got these two side by side, but they didn't have that. But that scope of practice was based on guidelines that were originally developed for the College of Midwives, which is a separate entity. And those guidelines came out of the Home Birth Association handbook that they were running. So this scope has been through a few iterations, and this one bears just no resemblance to anything even remotely like how it started. So there's that. So you've got your Midwifery Council. That's what they do. They are a legislated body, and they're quite powerful. They actually run all of these things, or provide for them in their practice. So what that means is that they set the scope of practice, and they write it. They've got quite a bit of leeway as a body corporate under the HCPAA to write their own scope of practice. There are some limits on it in legislation, but it's pretty broad, so they can do whatever they like, and that's so that the ministry isn't dictating, because that's the idea, is that they have an independent body that's actually familiar with what they do, so they can all write their own scope of practice that actually is meaningful for the profession. And then that goes off to the Minister of Health. Our Minister of Health at the moment is Shane Reti, and I believe it's on his desk. Now, once he has it, by law, he must present it to the House. He can't get involved because, again, then you've got this conflict of interest between your body corporate and the Ministry of Health, which this whole thing is designed to separate a little bit. So he has to present it to the scope of practice in the House. And in the usual course of events, the House would say, he would go along and on Monday morning and sitting day and say, good morning, Honourable Shane Reti, Minister for Health, presenting Midwifery Council under section 2.15b, blah, blah, blah. Everybody, this is the scope of practice. And then they all go, aye, and then off it goes to the Regulations Review Committee, who actually determine whether or not the scope can be regulated. They decide whether the wording is fit for purpose, and whether, they're lawyers and the like, and there's only 4 people on it. And so they do this and put it through a process. And then once that's happened, in the main, these scopes of practice, this is a sort of fairly pro forma thing to do. You go along and say, you might say tweak 1 or 2 words, but of course this one's an absolute disaster, so it's going to take them a while. But in the normal course of events, they would just say, yes, we'll change this and that, and then that'll be fine. And then it gets gazetted. So then it goes into, it gets published in the New Zealand Gazette, which is the newspaper's government paper of record. And the whole scope is practiced under, and that has to happen by published, and that has to happen by law. And once that's done, then the Midwifery Council can, that's it. It's in effect.
Right.
So that's
legal. They can impose that. Yeah.
They can impose that. Now, there is a point at which when Shane Reti presents the scope, the House may disallow it. So it's possible that that another MP could stand up and say, well, I object. Whether or not that's going to do anything, I don't know. It's not. I don't think this has ever actually been tried before, that a member of the House has objected to a scope of practice from any of these professions. So how that goes, I don't know, and we haven't got that much time to pick an MP or two to hassle to do this. But it is a possibility. So there's that. The other thing about the Midwifery Council and the scope of practice is that it determines what you can teach all of the incoming midwives.
Right.
So that's what they talked about in their original letter when they were applying for the funding. They were sitting around in their ghastly meeting going, how can we get rid of women?
So how can we get rid of women? From the scope?
From
Right.
scope, yes. Yeah. We need to, what we want to do is take all the words for women out and put the word for whānau in. How will we do it? We'll just do it. We'll do the scope. And then they realized that they were going to do just the education requirements. They were going to go after all the certificates, and there are 5 tertiary institutions, universities, where you can go and do your 4-year midwifery degree. It's not a 6-month course or anything. It's, you're basically a birth specialist at the end of that. And the Midwifery Council sets the education requirements and the standards and so on that these universities then teach and have to meet. And the way that they do that is by using the scope of practice, because that's the foundational document for it all. So in any education that they then send on to these universities and say, okay, this is what's really important. This is the updated thing from our, at AGM. We want you to include this in the course. Now they're going to redo it all. So every single part of midwifery education will be riddled with wokeism, because they've got every midwife who comes through, they've described it as so that they can practice safely within the scope, which means obediently,
yes,
and humbly, and with the proper civility, servility.
So it's really is quite a dominating document.
Yes.
The scope of practice, and this is probably something would have probably been good to explain at the beginning, but never mind. Hopefully everybody's watched till this far.
Yeah, well, sorry, but yeah.
No, that's fine. And I could have directed that if I'd thought about it. So anyway, so that's why this petition that Deb Hayes has presented against the revised scope of practice is very important. Yes. Because, and she, as a parliamentary petition, and she wants it investigated. And she gained like nearly 7,500 signatures for that, which for New Zealand is, it's a sizable number for a petition. And
yeah, it's really a sizable number for any of our petitions. That most of our petitions, parliamentary petitions, never go anywhere. And that's partly, you don't need a minimum number of signatures. You can have just yours if you want, but you've got to get an MP to present it, or it just sits there. Yeah. And most petitions don't get more than sort of 200-300 signatures. Deb's one was extraordinary, and that it got as many signatures as it did in such a short space of time. And it's in the top 5 in the first 100. So people really care about this. We don't like it,
Yes, exactly. And it's quite incredible how tone deaf, so many of our government, our MPs, our public service workers, and as you say, and the women in the Midwifery Council, how tone deaf they are to what the general public actually do and don't like. Yes. So anyway, luckily Deb's electoral MP for Rangitata, James Meager, is going to present it to Parliament. And we're going to actually, some of us are going to get together, and I hope you're able to come to Wellington. We'll get together in Wellington at Parliament, and he's going to come out of Parliament. We can present it to him. It's a performative thing, that you actually sort of he comes out of Parliament and we present it to him on the steps of Parliament, basically. And then he takes it back into Parliament and presents it to them. So that's going to be on Tuesday, the 9th of April at 1 p.m. in Wellington at Parliament buildings.
I can't wait. And, you know, I know that it's supposed to be performative, but I won't be performing. I'll be so happy to be there and to be, you know, handing over this paper. Like, it's different in person, isn't it? You know, when you
I mean,
gather...
when I say performative, it's because it's not a necessary action, but it's a very satisfying action to sort of be able to hand it over personally, you know, to this MP, and in person, you see face to face, all that, you know, and they take
eyes and smiles and human connection, you know, like just real, and all these people who signed it, you know, wanting to do something, it's actually going somewhere, which is really great. And when it gets through the House to the Select Committee, it's a similar sort of process to the Regulations Review Committee. They've got 4 MPs on that committee who are going to consider the petition. And a select committee considering a parliamentary petition actually has quite a lot of power. They can do quite a bit. So if everybody can look up, you know, who's on these select committees for the petitions, and start sharing your ideas with them, you know, email these people and say, we don't like this, we want this changed or that changed or whatever it is, because they have to actually take this into account. They do have to sit around and discuss this petition and what their powers are, and they can instruct government to do a number of things about it. They can instruct government to take action in a number of ways. And if you go to the Parliamentary Petitions website, then you can actually find out what they can do, and they've got some power. So you know, if we can put some energy into communicating with those people who are, I think there's, from memory, I think there's 2 Nats, 1 Green and a Labour MP. So
it's a 50-50.
50-50, yeah. You
know,
he is, from what I remember, and I might be getting my committees mixed up with the Regulations Review and the Select Committee, but I don't think so. Don't think so. I think on the Select Committee, the Labour MP is his main focus is aged care. You know, he's not hugely involved in all of this, so he might be quite amenable to, you know, he might be quite sort of, if not forced to toe the party line, you know, he might be someone to put some pressure on, because it'll be...
We can only hope. We're going to put a press release out soon about it, so hopefully some of the... Well, I don't expect that some of the mainstream media will pick it up, but maybe some of the smaller ones will, about the presenting the petition. So that'll be good. So that's where we're at the moment, and we can only hope, that it's actually looked at properly when the scope is looked at properly, because the experience so far is that everything just gets... Every bit of wokery gets passed through. So we're just kind of hoping now that some brakes start getting put on and actually start looking at this properly instead of just sort of like, oh yeah, tick it off.
I certainly do. I really do. And I think the other thing that's a little bit exciting and hopeful about this about this particular action is that other midwives around the world and midwives organizations are also struggling. And New Zealand is so woke. We're so woke, and we've got it bad, really bad comparatively. And if we can manage to fight this one off and keep our Midwifery Council at bay, that is going to be an incredible win for all of the women of New Zealand and around the world. You know, they'll be able to look if they can do it. Those poor, you know, those women down there dealing with the nutters who come to places like Albert Park, and, you know, if they can do it, we can do it. You know, and I really want that, because this is right to the heart of who we are. This is right to, you know, we're women.
Absolutely. You know? I mean, where does it all begin?
Yeah, it begins, and they're aiming for they're going for us before conception. They're going after our children. They're trying to destroy our families and make us get that family is a good thing to have, and I'm just, no, to drag me fingernails in the ground. I won't let that go. Yeah.
So fundamentally, a midwifery world is, if you can get them to come back to sense and sensibility and reality, then there's a good chance you can permeate it throughout other organisations.
Yes, this is a really important one, and So thank you for letting me go on and on and on about words and language.
Look, Sarah, it was great to talk to you. Absolutely, and as I said, I'll put information in the description below this so people can know once again when the presentation of the petition is going to happen. Where they can go and find your Substack, and I might find other bits of information. So do go and have a look for those, and we'll talk again.
Sorry,
the Manawahine Kuriro. I'll put their website down there, yes, because they've been very significant in this. Very supportive of Deb Hayes. So they've got a new website, so that'll go in,
and collated a lot of information, and we'll definitely have the event for the 9th up on the website on our events page. I'll be building that this afternoon. It's already there. Placeholder, so
we'll share that. All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
And we'll talk again sometime.
Yeah. Awesome.